To organize a chaotic dataset with an algorithm like k-means, you have to start by guessing. You must tell the computer exactly how many groups, or k, exist before the analysis even begins. Forcing natural information into rigid, predetermined boxes often warps the true shape of the data. Real-world data is inherently nested. You find distinct subtopics grouped inside broader categories, or specific species branching out of larger biological families. This diagram places algorithm 19, hierarchical clustering, directly next to k-means, but it takes the opposite approach. Instead of guessing a number from the top down, it lets the data's natural structure reveal itself from the bottom up. Uncovering the true relationships inside a complex dataset requires mapping the specific architecture of the data itself. In the late 1950s, biologists Robert Sokol and Peter Sneath faced a massive problem. The way scientists classified organisms relied heavily on subjective human judgment. Two experts could look at the same beetles and sort them differently based on their own evolutionary opinions. They proposed a radical alternative: measure the objective physical characters of every organism, calculate a strict mathematical similarity between every pair, and let a procedural loop group them automatically. This heat map uses their invention on its edges, the dendrogram. Introduced in their 1963 book, this tree-shaped diagram records the exact mathematical distance at which different groups fuse together. A procedure originally designed to remove human bias from sorting insects is now a cornerstone of unsupervised machine learning. The most common version is agglomerative, meaning it builds from the bottom up. It assumes every single data point is its own unique, isolated cluster. Then it scans the grid to find the two closest clusters and fuses them into a single node. The algorithm repeats this proximity search and merge over and over. It continues linking pairs until every single point is absorbed into one massive cluster, recording each connection as a branch in a growing tree. Every time a connection is made, the height of that specific branch is plotted to match the exact mathematical distance between the two clusters that just merged. By tracking these sequential connections, the algorithm generates a complete map of how the data relates to itself at every possible scale. In this dendrogram, vertical height is merge distance. Short branches mean similar points merged early. By drawing a horizontal cut line, you slice branches at a specific threshold. The points beneath become your final groups, avoiding guessing k up front. This chart flips the logic horizontally. Points C and D are closest, joining first at a low distance value. Next, A and B join. The length of the linking line explicitly defines their identity as a distinct cluster. This diagram shows how we measure distance between multi-point clusters using linkage rules. You can calculate based on the nearest pair, farthest pair, or average. The bottom right quadrant illustrates word linkage, which merges clusters to cause the smallest variance increase, building compact groups. The mathematical linkage rule you choose dictates the raw topological shape of the tree. Where you slice through that shape determines the final resolution of your categories. The entire engine runs on a simple loop. Scan for the closest pair, merge them, recompute all distances using your linkage rule, and repeat. This chart shows the heavy cost of that loop. Comparing every cluster requires an n-by-n proximity matrix, demanding O(n)² memory. But the trade-off is a deterministic result. There are no random starting seeds, yielding a nested hierarchy that flat clustering cannot produce. For a programmer, the challenge shifts. You no longer have to blindly guess the exact number of groups from the very beginning. Instead, you decide which distance metric and linkage rule accurately reflect the reality of the data. The algorithm involves complex mathematical bookkeeping behind the scenes, but translating that nested structure into running code takes only a few lines.
Now we're going to prove that those complex structures can be generated in just 3 lines of Python. We're running this inside a Jupyter notebook, directly from our source material, 50 algorithms every programmer should know. We load a dataset of 20 points with x and y coordinates. Notice what's missing: no category column or answer key. It's a purely unsupervised problem. We must discover the natural geometry, a loose collection of dots top left and a denser group bottom right. The entire challenge of unsupervised machine learning is forcing the computer to discover that exact spatial separation without human intervention. We import the tool from scikit-learn and initialize our model with a single line of code. Let's look at the 3 parameters we're passing into the agglomerative clustering function. First, we set the number of clusters to 2. This acts as the explicit stopping point for the bottom-up merges, represented by this red dashed cut line. This parameter acts like a blade, slicing the tree at a height yielding exactly 2 distinct groups. Next, we specify our affinity as Euclidean. This defines the mathematical rule the machine uses to measure the physical point-to-point space between data entries, the as the crow flies distance. Modern versions of scikit-learn have transitioned to using the term metric instead of affinity, though the underlying straight-line math remains identical. The final parameter we set is ward. This dictates how our clusters choose to merge, specifically by identifying the pair that minimizes the increase in total within cluster variance. Ward linkage has a hard dependency on Euclidean distance to calculate that variance. Swapping this one word for single or complete linkage would generate a completely different tree structure. Finally, we call fit predict. This is the trigger that runs the entire agglomerative loop and outputs our cluster assignments in a single step. These abstract Python parameters essentially function as mathematical levers, translating our visual human intuition into strict machine instructions. Executing the final print command reveals the machine's output as a raw array of zeros and ones. We prove the algorithm's success by mapping these labels back onto our original plot. The zeros and ones perfectly segregate those upper left and lower right bands we spotted earlier. The machine never actually saw those geometric shapes. It blindly followed distance measurements and variance rules to autonomously find the truth. Scikit-learn provides these flat labels for convenience, but you would need different tools to visually plot the deep merge history the machine calculated in the background. These 3 lines of code are elegant, but they hide a massive computational cost. Because they require order of n squared space for the proximity matrix, we have to ask, when will this tool inevitably crash under the weight of real-world big data? This method crashes under the weight of massive datasets. You have to wonder when it's actually worth running. You don't pull this off the shelf for a billion-row database. You use it when your data inherently requires a nested structural map, rather than simple group labels. Its value lies in exposing the intricate relationships beneath the surface that faster, flat algorithms completely gloss over. Biologists mapping evolutionary history track how species diverged and branched from common ancestors over eons, a process that requires a tree-like structure to be accurate. Bioinformatics takes this a step further. Analyzing gene expression requires researchers to map complex relationships between specific samples and thousands of individual genes simultaneously. This heat map shows that complexity in action. The dense blocks of red and green squares in the central grid represent distinct levels of gene expression across different samples. And the data isn't placed here randomly. Notice the dendrograms lining the top and right axes. These branching structures dictate the exact order of the rows and columns, grouping co-expressed genes into clear visual blocks. Beyond biology, this translates directly to commerce. When segmenting customers or sorting documents, it helps to identify broad categories that can be drilled down into highly specific microsegments. If you try to force a flat algorithm like k-means onto this kind of structure, you have to guess the target number of groups, the k-value up front. Guess wrong, and you risk slicing natural groupings in half. This chart compares k-means clusters on the left against actual iris flower species on the right. The true classifications are messy and overlapping, proving that perfect, evenly spaced boundaries rarely exist in nature. Because of that messy reality, the tree itself becomes the final deliverable. It lets you read the entire structural map first and decide exactly where to draw your boundaries only after you see the full picture. That gives agglomerative clustering its first major advantage. You never have to guess the ideal number of clusters before you start. By working bottom-up, the structure forms naturally. Second, it provides a complete, interpretable historical record. You can trace the exact distance and logic behind every single merge decision from start to finish. Third, it is strictly deterministic. There are no randomized starting seeds here. Run the same dataset 10 times and you will get the exact same tree 10 times. Finally, it offers incredible mathematical flexibility. You can adapt the algorithm to use entirely different definitions of distance by applying custom linkage rules. This combination of transparency, repeatability, and flexibility makes hierarchical clustering uniquely suited for projects that prioritize structural interpretability over processing speed. But the exact mechanics that make it powerful also creates its breaking point. Computing the distance between every single point means generating an O of n squared proximity matrix. Pushing hundreds of thousands of rows through that process will freeze most hardware. Even if your system can handle the math, the strategy itself is greedy and irrevocable. If the algorithm makes a poor merge decision early on, it can never back up and fix it. That single error permanently distorts the rest of the branch. Then there is linkage sensitivity. The way you define the distance between clusters will drastically alter your final map. This diagram illustrates 4 different answers to the question, how far apart are 2 clusters? Choosing to measure between the nearest pair of points versus the farthest pair of points completely rewrites the merging logic. Finally, there is the hierarchy assumption. If your underlying data consists of dense, irregular blobs laced with noise, forcing it into a branched tree shape creates false relationships that don't exist. If you are operating at a massive scale or dealing with highly irregular shapes, the tree becomes a liability, and a flat clustering approach is required. The dendrogram provides a clear, exhaustive map of how every data point relates to every other, assuming you can navigate its computational costs. The deep dive into these trade-offs is covered extensively in Imran Ahmad's 50 Algorithms Every Programmer Should Know, and you can find interactive visualizations for these exact algorithms over on the Neurals platform. Hierarchical clustering needs no K, but it still struggles with noise and odd shapes. The next idea finds clusters by density and isn't afraid to call a point an outlier.